Sky,
I heard someone say. They were shaking me.
Sky.
They said it again as they shook me. For a moment I didn't recognize the name. Then it hit me. Alicia is dead. That innocent girl who loved and adored her father died when she walked out of that airport. Now all that is left is Sky the zombie. I opened my eyes and frowned. It took everything I had not to cry. I was disappointed that I was alive, that I was in this bed in the wretched hell. The woman shaking me looked at me sadly. They all knew I was barely hanging on. What little mind I had left was quickly fading.
You have a visitor,
the woman said. She smiled at me and patted me on my head. A visitor? I had been here for years and no one had ever gotten a visitor. I slowly got out of bed. I had to move slow. If I didn't, I would get sick and throw up. I had so much drugs in my system, any doctor would be amazed I was still alive. I had more drugs than blood, it seemed. I walked to the bathroom and splashed water on my face.
Tell him to leave, Sky. Tell him to leave and never come back,
one of the girls told me. She had a sad, pleading look on her face.
Him?
I asked. My heart raced. Could it be? Could my father have come to save me from this hell? I wanted to scream and run to him, but I knew I had to slowly walk into the other room. Would he recognize me? This shambling zombie that could barely walk. I knew my face and arms were scarred and scabbed where I had been picking at my flesh. I walked into the other room and saw him sitting on the couch. He stared right at me and did not recognize me. That broke my heart into a million pieces. Of course it was not his fault. I wanted to be his little girl again and run into his arms. He probably worked very hard to save up enough to get a visa to see me.
Abby?
I said. My voice was barely a whisper. My father looked old and tired. He turned to me and stared at me for a long moment, trying to recognize me through the drug-addled monster I had become.
Aisha?
My father asked. I could see the pain in his eyes. He ran to me and hugged me tightly. He wept into my hair as he held me. I could not help but weep as well.
What happened to you? You are coming home now,
my father said. His voice was sad and angry. I was helpless in his arms. I was back in his home trying not to laugh as he pretended to look for me. I could not help it.
Save me, Abby,
I whispered. I knew I should not have said that. I should have told him to leave and never come back. I should have told him his daughter was dead. All that was left was the zombie Sky. My words seemed to light a fire in my father's eyes. He stood and walked me to the door. The Egyptian men that guard the house started to yell at my father. My father yelled back. I was getting dizzy. I've never seen my father this angry. He grabbed a bat that was next to the door and smashed one of the men in the head with it. He kept on hitting him. Blood splattered on my father's face and arms. The other men backed up.
What cruel men are you? How could you betray our people and our culture like this? Allah curse you, traitors!
My father shouted at them in Arabic. I could tell the words stung them, that they hit home and found a sore spot in the men's hearts. They looked down in shame. I think they were going to let me go, but the door opened behind my father. I turned to see Tmac with a gun to my father's head.
Abby,
I whispered. He locked eyes with me. I think he knew he was dead. He didn't want the last thing he looked at to be that black demon, Tmac.
La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulallah,
my father said. He smiled at me. His eyes were warm. I was his little girl again. I didn't see Tmac pull the trigger or hear the gun go off. The side of my father's head exploded, and his body fell limp to the floor.
This is why we don't get fucking visitors,
Tmac shouted. He looked at the dead man that my father killed and shook his head. It was a waste of money and investment for him.
You're gonna pay for this, bitch,
Tmac said. He kicked my father's dead body several times, then walked over to me and beat me until I passed out. I blamed myself for my father dying. Why did I have to ask him to save me? What did I expect my father to do? He did what any loving father would do for their child. He tried to save me. He died for me. He could still be alive right now if I had not whispered those words to him. If I had let go of Alicia and my father a long time ago. I wept for weeks after Tmac murdered my father. Of course, I never wept openly. I held it in until I had a moment alone. As soon as I was alone, I wept hard. I wanted to die. I was relentless on the drugs. I had to erase the look of pain in my father's eyes as he recognized me. I had to stop seeing the smile on his face as he said Shahada. He knew he was going to die. Most of all, I didn't want to see his face explode and his body falling dead at my feet.
Oh, Abby.
I wept. What little mind I had left died with my father. I was so gone that Tmac took me off the corner. I could barely walk. I was stumbling and falling all over the place. He put me in an apartment with Maya. I was to do in-calls. He wanted to slowly wean me off the drugs, but I needed the drugs or I would die. I would rather be high and feel sick on the drugs than face the memories and the pain of what I had endured. The apartment was nice. Well, anything was when you're used to sharing a dorm with several other women. It was not until many years later that I discovered why my father had come to see me. My mother had died. He wanted me to come home for the funeral. I was alone. I did not know where my siblings were, and I had to forget about them. Tmac started to see me often in the apartment. He forced himself on me. I had to do my job and please him. It was extremely hard for me to please the man who murdered my father. I could deal with what he had done to me, but my father was my world. Tmac took the last shred of light I clung to. I dreamt about killing him as he slept next to me. It would take nothing for me to stab him in the throat with one of the many needles around me. But I never could find the courage to. Then, out of nowhere, I was pregnant. I knew whose child it was. Tmac was the only man I had actual sex with for many months. I didn't want this child. I made up my mind that I would kill it. I took so many drugs trying to overdose and kill the black fetus of Tmac inside of me. I felt like I was carrying a demon in my womb. When that failed, I would beat my stomach. I tried sticking a coat hanger in me to kill it. Still, this bastard would not die. I promised myself I would kill this child even if I had to give birth to it first. Tmac's seed would never be safe with me. I found myself strapped to a hospital bed. My stomach was bleeding and scratched from me trying to claw this black bastard out of me. I wept and I screamed. I did not want to have this baby, yet Tmac was forcing me to have his child. I could see my father sitting in the corner watching me as I cried and strained the bonds that held me to this bed. He shook his head and turned his back to me. He was ashamed of me.
Oh, Abby.
I wept.
Don't be ashamed of me, please.
I begged my father. Of course, my father was not there, but my mind was so far gone that I saw him there. There was a small part of me that fought to cling to sanity. That small part of me was screaming, trying to remind me that my father was dead and that I was losing my mind. Tmac would come in the room when I was screaming too much and inject me with something. I don't know what it was, but it calmed me. I felt the same high that I did years ago when the women held me down in that dorm room and injected me with what seemed like the same thing. Tmac rubbed my stomach.
It's a boy, Sky. I'm having a son,
Tmac said. He seemed lost in that thought. I wondered what made this son so special. I knew I could not be the only woman he had raped and forced to have his kid.